Alright, hey everybody, this is Unit 3.2, Factoring Quadratic Trinomials. So our last unit, last lesson, we focused on factoring out the greatest common factor, and also how to factor if we had 4 terms. Okay, so the rest of this unit will be focusing on quadratics in standard form. So standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c could be any number. Okay, so we're going to have trinomials. We could also have binomials if b or c were missing. Okay. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go along. All right, so going back to kind of like our last lesson, is we had a problem that was like this, and I asked you to use the distributor property. We had like boxes like this, and we'd put our terms like this, and we would multiply. Okay, because that's what the distributor property is. It's just multiplication. So we'd get 8x squared minus 2x, 4x, and then negative 1. Okay. In our last lesson, we kind of stopped there, and we learned how to go backwards by factoring each column and row. Okay, if we were to finish this problem, we would combine like terms. Okay, so we would end up getting, I'm just going to rewrite this part, minus 2x plus 4x minus 1. Okay, and then yes, we would combine like terms, and we would get 2x. Okay, so you remember that? Alright, so last time we learned how to go from here to here. Today we're going to learn how to go from here to here. Okay? Alright, so basically, again, we're just doing the opposite of distributing, okay? And that's called factoring. All right, so here is our first problem. Let's just look at it. It's actually the same problem that we did up here, but we're just going to do it backwards, okay? So when we're factoring, what we're going to do is, and this is kind of like the tricky part, is that we multiply the first and last term. That ends up giving us negative 8, okay, x squared. All right, what we want is we want to find two numbers that multiply to that, but the thing is those two things need to also add or subtract to give us the middle term. Okay, so this comes from here. Sometimes I'll call this as glasses. Okay, we need to find the two things that multiply the glasses and add to the middle term. Okay? Alright, so think about that for a little bit. What I would recommend if you ever are stuck is to write down factor pairs. Things that multiply to 8, like 1 and 8, and 2 and 4. Okay? Don't worry about the sign so far. Just think of the two things that could multiply to 8. From there, you should be able to come up with some combination of these that could give us 2. And then you can decide what the signs need to be. So for this example, 1 and 8, there's no way you can get 1 and 8 to give you 2. But 2 and 4, yeah, we could use 2 and 4 to give us 2. We'd want to do something like maybe negative 2 plus 4. Okay, or you could do 4 minus 2. It doesn't have to add 2, really. You could add or subtract 2. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So negative 2x times 4x gives us negative 8x, and negative 2x plus 4x does give us 2x. So that is kind of the new thing that we're covering. Okay. So basically, we now know that 2x, that middle term, is equal to negative 2x plus 4x. So we would do 8x squared. We're going to substitute that in, minus 2x plus 4x, and then minus 1. Okay? So we just take this and we substitute it in for that middle term. And we end up getting 4 terms. So that is the new part. That's what we're trying to get to today, is to be able to come up with those two things that can multiply and add. If you can figure that out, now you have 4 terms. We can use the box in order to factor out the two binomials. Okay? So here we'll finish that up. So this isn't new, but we'll just write those out and get some extra practice. So we plug in those 4 boxes, or 4 terms into the 4 boxes, and then we factor out the greatest common factor. So here we've got 4 and x. We've got negative 1. Here we've got 2 and x. And here another 1. We'll write down our binomials, our factors. Our factors would be 4x minus 1, and the other factor would be 2x plus 1. And we're good to go. Okay, so if you need it, here's kind of like the steps on how we do that. When I say grouping, it means that's where we plug in the 4 terms, okay, into the box. All right, so let's try another one. So we want to find two things that multiply to negative 12x squared and add or subtract to the middle term. Again, if you're stuck, we can write down factor pairs for 12. We could do 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Okay, next we could try 4, but we already have 4, so we finished it all up. Okay, so you don't need to start, you don't need to keep going once you've gotten numbers that you have already shown. Okay, so those are all of our choices. How can we come up with 11? Hopefully you're thinking 1 and 12. We could do 12 minus 1, or negative 1 plus 12. Again, it doesn't really matter what order. Okay? All right. And then we'll double check. So negative 1x times 12x does give us negative 12x. Okay, so we will take this and substitute it in for the middle term. Okay, so we got 3x squared minus 1x plus 12x minus 4. Okay, again, it doesn't really matter what order you put those in. When you plug them in, you'll still get the same thing. So now we've got our box. Greatest common factor for each row and column. Again, for the first row, nothing goes into 3 and 1 except for 1. You're welcome to write 1 if you want. And then our last term tells us how many x's we can take. Next one looks like we could take out a 4. And again, no x to take because there's no x's there. First column, 3 goes into 3 and 12. And we can take an x because the last term has an x. And then the last column, we have a leading negative right here. So we'll take a negative, and looks like the only thing that goes into 1 and 4 is 1. So that would be our answer. So 3x minus 1 and 1x, or just x, plus 4. Okay? All right. Why don't you pause and give C a try, and then you can check and see how you did. All right, so we multiply first and last, so it needs to multiply to give us negative 30a squared, and add or subtract to give us negative 13a. All right, so I promise the more you practice this, the faster it's going to come for you. I'm trying to go a little slow, but you should, as you practice and practice, you'll get a lot better, okay? So again, if you are stuck, write down factor pairs, 1 and 30, so that can't give you 13. Next would be 2 and 15. That could give us 13, right? So if you find something that works, you don't need to keep going. But I wouldn't skip numbers. I would go 1, 2, 3, 4 until you find something that works. So let's see, what signs do they need to be? So we could be 2x, and we could do minus 15x. Okay, and 2x times negative 15x, that does give us negative 30a squared. I don't know why I'm saying x's. These are a's. Okay. All right, so then we can plug that in for our middle term. So we get 5a squared. Again, that negative 13a is the same as 2a minus 15a. And then we can put those into our box. And again, some of you I'm sure will do shortcuts to maybe not write as much. Just make sure you understand what's going on, okay? Alright, so then we do the same as what we did in our last lesson. Take out the greatest common factor of each row and column. So you should have a. Here we have a leading negative and looks like 3. This first column would be 5 and an A, and then it looks like 2. Again, I would highly recommend, especially when these things are getting a little more complicated, that you check them out. So A times 5A is 5A squared. A times 2 is 2A. Negative 3 times 5 is negative 15A, and then negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. So you can always know 100% if you've got this right or wrong. If you will just take the 15 seconds to just check them. Okay? Oops. What to box that. All right. Okay. So, last thing that we really need to do, and those shouldn't be too bad, is sometimes there's going to be a greatest common factor. So we kind of talked about that maybe a teeny bit in class last time, but there wasn't any from the homework. But today you'll want to make sure you get it here. You'll want to check and see if there's a greatest common factor. And it's not going to, on your homework, it's not going to tell you when to do that. So you always need to check. So here it looks like there's a 2 that we could factor out. Again, we just divide everything by 2. Maybe I should have done that, just so we have a good example. So we divide everything by 2, we get 2n squared minus 7n, and then minus 4. Okay, so from there is where we will do our glasses. I think it's a really good idea if you factor out the greatest common factor that you will write it here at the end so you don't forget. Okay? Alright, so then we would do the 2 things that multiply and add. Again, glasses, the 2n squared times negative 4 gives us negative 8n squared and adds to negative 7n. Here, I'm pretty sure 1 and 8 would have to work here. So maybe negative 8 plus 1 would work. Okay, so then we can plug that in. Okay, here's a common mistake, is people take it and put it into here. Okay, we use the glasses for that negative 7 and that negative 8, so I guess the negative 8. If that's what we're using to find our add to and multiply to, we need to plug that in for the from there, okay, if that makes any sense. So we'll have 2n squared minus 8n plus 1n minus 4. And that's what we can plug into the box. Please, please, please do not plug it into the original equation. Do not put it into there, okay? All right. So then we'll take out the greatest common factor. So 2n, 1. This would be like a 1n, or just n. And then negative 4. Okay? Again, we can multiply them back and check them if you need to, but 2n plus 1 and n minus 4. Alright, so pause and give this one a try, if you would. Alright, so greatest common factor, you might be tempted to say, there isn't one, so I'm just going to go and do glasses. But again, leading negative is a greatest common factor. So we would take out a negative, and then we would divide everything by a negative, and would get 3x squared plus 11x minus 4. Then we can use our glasses. Oops, that did not print. Okay. Again, when we're all done, I think it's a great idea to put that greatest common factor so you don't forget. Alright, so it needs to multiply to negative 12 x squared and adds to 11. This looks very similar to what we've done before. So maybe 12 and a negative 1. Sorry, that should be plus. Okay. Again, it doesn't really matter. You could do 12 minus 1 if you want it like that. Okay. And these are x's. And we could double check by multiplying those together, and yep, it gives you negative 12x squared. So then we'll plug that in to our middle term. Again, not into the original, okay? So after you take out the greatest common factor. So here I'm just going to write it here. So 3x squared, and then we've got 12x minus 1x minus 4. And then we'd do the greatest common factor. So 3x, negative 1, x, and 4. So we put those in our binomials, or our parentheses, I should say, and we're done. Okay? All right. So last thing that we need to maybe talk about is just things like this. This is more just kind of like a brain teaser. See if you can figure out what these these empty spots need to be. Okay? And it might be good for you to just pause and think about it for a little bit. It'll stick in your brain a little better. Okay? But one way to do that is to kind of go and use the distributive property. So I kind of think that's a great idea. Or you can just try and think about it. But here it's easy to just use like a box and say, ooh, I'm just going to do that. So it's kind of like going back to our first unit. So x squared minus 4x, and this would be 10x, and negative 40. So you see that negative 40 is already there. We see that x squared is already there. So what we're missing is just that middle term. And that's just combining like terms. So we'd get what? 6 plus 6x. All right. Same sort of thing. Sorry. We can give that a try. Why don't you give that a try, but you'll end up getting plus 10x. Sorry. All right. And then 5 is kind of going intense here. If you want to kind of think about it, is that we came up with the 40 because we multiplied these two things, right? We used the box or whatever, but we multiplied them together, and that gave you that negative 40. So here, this is more open. I think it's almost easier, is we just need to find two things that multiply to negative 24. So that could be lots of things. You could do, we could kind of write down factor pairs. We could do 1 and 24, maybe a negative 1 and 24. You could do 1 times negative 24. You could do 2 and, or negative 2 and 12, or 2 and negative 12. So there's lots of choices that can make that work. So if you put those in, I'm just going to do the first one. Plus 24. Like if we were to multiply those together, if you did the box, it would give you that negative 24. So now we just need to figure out the same thing that we found here. I'm just going to use the box again. So x minus 1 and x and 24. So we get x squared and negative x and 24x. And then what? Negative 24. Okay, so again, we see that already. We already have that x squared. We just need to combine like terms. Okay, and we get 23x. Okay. One thing that will help you, perhaps, that will save you some time, is this is what multiplies to, and this is what you add to. If you were to add those together, that gives you 23. If we add these together, it gives us 6. Okay? Here, if we add these together, that gives us 10x. Okay? So, why don't you give C a try? I'm going to come up with my example. I'm going to do 2 and 15. So 2 and 15. If you multiplied that, it would give you to 30. And then we'll just add those together to give us plus 17x. Okay? But again, you could use a box if you were stuck or whatever. You could do x plus 2 and x and 15 and figure out what these two things need to be. Okay? All right. Oh yeah, and there's one more thing I want to talk about on your homework is you'll see something maybe like this. So how do you start? How should you always start a problem? Okay, none of these had issues, or I guess these ones had issues, maybe, not issues, but we need to look and see always if there's a greatest common factor, especially if you have like a binomial. So if you have a binomial like this, what's the greatest common factor? Well, for the numbers, yeah, it's just a 1, but what about the variables? Again, this isn't standard form, so the last thing is how many n's we could take out. So we could take out an n, and then we want to figure out what's left. So if we simplified that, we'd get n minus 10. Okay, that is our answer. Okay, this can't be simplified any further. We can't do glasses because we don't have an x squared anywhere. So always check and see if there's a greatest common factor first. If you tried to do glasses first, this would be like plus 0. So you need to find something that multiplies to 0 and then adds to negative 10. And then you do something like 0 and negative 10. But then you'll end up getting the same thing. It's just like a circle that keeps going back. And you'll never find something that works. But if we find the greatest common factor first, then you're just done. Okay, so always check on greatest common factors first. Okay, all right, so that's it. If you have questions, let me know. Come and talk to me.